More than 40% of Europe is facing some form of drought, as some countries experienced a record-breaking hot and dry spring. For the first time in the EU's history, Brussels is calling on all member states to cut water use by 10% by 2030. But with climate change intensifying, will that be enough to secure Europe's water future? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Robyn Dwyer. Hot weather across Europe is drying up rivers and reservoirs, leading to a European water shortage. Some countries, like Italy and Portugal, are tightening their use of water to tackle the issue. But can restrictions help safeguard Europe's water?
Europe is facing the worst water crisis in decades, and for the first time, Brussels is preparing to act. The EU is asking European countries to cut their water use as reserves dry up, due to a shocking 40% of Europe in drought, with holiday spots like Spain, Cyprus and Greece hardest hit. The crisis is driven by climate change, bringing record-breaking heat and significantly less rainfall to Europe this summer. The UK's reservoirs are the driest in 69 years. Much of Europe's water is also wasted. 25% in the EU is lost to leaks. Bulgaria and Ireland have the highest losses, with over 50% of their water supplies going down the drain. In Greece, residents blame the government for their water loss.
Unfortunately, its management is in a terrible state. Both municipal water providers have more than 50% water loss. It's not only that we are losing water, it also costs us in that we are also paying for the electricity used to pump out the water.
Over-tourism is also adding pressure to the country's water supplies. Islands like Santorini and Mykonos are forced to ship in water from the mainland. Several EU states, such as France and Germany, have imposed restrictions, prioritising drinking water and sanitation. So can Europe solve its water crisis?
So let's meet our guests. And in Marlborough in the UK is James Wallace, who's CEO at River Action, a charity focused on rescuing Britain's rivers from pollution. In Dublin is Christopher Caldwell, who's CEO at United Renewables. In California in the United States, we have Jasper Vrugt, a hydrologist and professor at the University of California. And here with me in the studio is Sasha Woods, who's Director of Science and Policy at Earthwatch Europe. Great to have you all with us on the programme. So I want to start with you, James, if I can, and start in the UK, because there's been a warning that England could possibly run out of drinking water in the next 10 years if things don't change. How much of a problem is water scarcity in the UK?
Well, as we're speaking, it's actually raining outside, which is rather ironic, having had the driest spring on record. However, the news is really not good at all. I would go as far as saying we're in an emergency, a freshwater emergency in Britain, the southeast particularly, but other parts of the country too. And why is that happening? Well, we have about 3 billion litres of clean drinking water leaked every single day by the water industry, by water operators who also look after our sewage. And we have the Environment Agency predicting that by 2050, we're going to be about 5 billion litres of drinking water a day short. So when you add all this up and the cost to the economy as well, we're at very high risk. And bearing in mind, we're talking about the lifeblood of our entire society, from food production to healthcare industry and every home, of course. We all rely on clean drinking water. And we're extremely concerned about the situation across Britain.
And Sasha, UK, of course, a country known for being raining today, as James says, but actually it has had the driest spring in 50 years. Are we at a critical moment here?
Absolutely. Not only are we lacking enough fresh water, but our water quality is very poor. We know from our last citizen science campaign that 66% of freshwater sites have poor water quality. So then when you lower the amount of water we have, the concentration of pollutants goes up.
And Jesper, you hail from the Netherlands originally, don't you, now in California, but the Netherlands is another country which perhaps has a wetter climate than some others in Europe, but also has problems with its water supply.
Yeah, I've been living in the US now for 20 years, and I talk to my parents and friends, colleagues, weekly, and what I hear is that the climate situation has just changed so drastically in the last 10, 15 years. This spring has been extremely dry, no rain for weeks and weeks and weeks. And usually that's among one of the wettest periods of the year. And then we have forest fires in the Netherlands, something really that's extremely rare. And that's only the Netherlands, but if you hear the issues in Europe with fires, different countries, droughts now in the Alps, Switzerland, a little town with the glaciers buried under a glacier. This is consequences of climate change, global warming, visible all over Europe and the rest of the world.
So, Chris, as Jasper says, different issues in different countries in Europe, but Brussels has asked its member countries to improve water efficiency by at least 10% by 2030. Is this a moment where there is a recognition that there really is an issue here?
Well, there is a recognition, but the recognition is being caused because there's a huge amount of social pressure coming down. There's been public patience has been wearing very thin. So in southern Europe, tensions over water flaring up. There's legal battles over dam building in Spain. There's physical confrontations between farmers and environmental groups in France. This is a step forward. It is a positive step that the EU is proposing. 10% cuts in water consumption by 2030. Now, it's not legally binding, but they have put some money behind it. There's a 15 billion euro package from the European Central Bank, which should help to focus minds, but if you'll bear with the analogy, it's a drop in the ocean. The European Commission estimates that we need about 23 billion a year just to modernise our current infrastructure, and the EU-backed think tank, the Water Europe, puts total investment needed at about 225 billion by 2030. So yeah, it's a good start, but we need an awful lot more.
So Sasha, climate obviously a factor here. Do countries need to reevaluate the way they manage their water based on the changes caused by the climate?
Absolutely. I think addressing any kind of water issue is going to take collective action from government, but also from communities. So there are certainly laws that need to be put in place by government. There's management that needs to be put in by the water companies. And then there are individual behaviours that we can all do that will improve the amount of water that we have available. Very simple things like thinking about how long we shower for, how often we flush the toilet. In the UK, the average person uses 142 litres of water a day, and we really need to be working to reduce that.
James, let's pick up on the idea of responsibility, if you like. How much responsibility do we personally have to take to be careful of our water and the way we use it, do you think?
Well, as Sasha says, we need to reduce consumption. The government estimate down to about 105 litres per day. However, the onus is often put on the demand side, which is very important, particularly when we look at industry, agriculture included, and abstraction affecting the very rare chalk streams that we have in Britain, for example. However, it's the industry that are responsible for this ultimately. The leaky pipes that I mentioned earlier on, the lack of regulation in this country. And the irony is that the emphasis is being put onto us consumers. So recently, we've heard that if we were to break a hosepipe ban, so if Sasha or I were to turn on our hosepipe and be caught during a ban, then we'll be fined £1,000. I would like to know what the government is going to be doing to the water industry for wasting 3 billion litres a day, and why this inequity. So we really need to speed up investment in our infrastructure and fix those leaky pipes.
So, Chris, I can see you nodding there. What do you think? Is infrastructure an issue that needs to be gotten on top of?
Yeah, 100%. The core issue here is that if we go back, so from the 1980s, the continent of Europe has increased its heat by 0.5 degree on average per decade. That's twice the global average, and there's lots of reasons for that, but that's a conversation another time. And as a result of that, we are having less rain, more dry periods, our reservoirs are drying up. There was a time where we could be dealing with with wasted water. We can no longer do that anymore. Now, the systems we use to manage water right now are no longer fit for purpose. Like many countries in the European Union don't even collect comprehensive data on water use. Like across the EU, we waste 25% of all drinking water in leaks. In some places like Bulgaria, it's up as high as 60%. So we're not only dealing with less water, we're dealing with a huge chunk of what we have. But the real issue is that we haven't invested in line with the new world. The new reality is the world is hotter and it's getting hotter all the time. We need to be understanding that and putting the capital that's required to deal with this new world and reduce all of that waste. Personal responsibility is one thing, but it won't get us anywhere close to where we need to do as we get hotter and hotter and water becomes more and more scarce.
So, Jasper, Chris says the water management systems that we have now are not fit for purpose. You're a hydrologist. What do you think? Do they need to be changed?
Yeah, I think that I think the good thing about electric panels is that people are much more aware of how much electricity they use. I remember about 12 years ago working with a colleague on water consumption here in California. And I never really thought about it, how much water people would use. But then I saw the numbers, and I saw numbers on an average of 200 gallons a day. And I contacted him. I said, there's a mistake here in unit. And then I realized how much water people are actually using. I think a lot of people don't realize how much water they're using on a daily basis. So I think it all starts with education, that people are much better aware of how much water they need and use each day. Updating our infrastructure, that's another, I think, important component. But I think the most important component is, improving education, that people are aware of how much they use, much better aware, and how much we spill. I mean, right now, water is running down the street where I live because people use too much water to irrigate their backyards here. So,
Sasha, I want to come to you. When it comes to water storage, which we've just been talking about, is the infrastructure there to support that? There's talk of more reservoirs being needed, but how easy is it to get those up and running?
Not easy at all, and it's not as simple as just adding a load of new reservoirs all across the country. You need to be very careful about where you're building reservoirs. What you don't want to do is build in areas where it's not appropriate and wipe out huge swathes of biodiversity in those areas. There's also the ability to use nature-based solutions, so having more natural spaces, wetlands, things that will retain the water in the ground can also be useful. A problem that we have is such high levels of urbanisation, where whenever it rains, if it rains too much, we have flooding because the water can't penetrate the concrete, it just runs off. And if it doesn't rain very much, we haven't got the natural land that can capture that water and store it as groundwater.
So, James, you campaign in the UK for river action, and rivers. One of the things one of the issues that's come up a lot is the pollution of rivers. How can that be tackled?
Well, it all links, as Sasha pointed out earlier, as water levels drop because of climate change and drought and pollution levels increase, the condensed E. coli, viruses, chemicals and so on in the water make it very dangerous to human health and to wildlife as well. So Earthwatch, Sasha's organisation, River Action, Surfers Against Sewage, the Rivers Trust and many others are all campaigning hard to try and clean up our waterways. And this is because of the breakdown in the way our regulatory environment works here. So if we just pop back onto reservoirs for a moment and look at the planning system, then the last time that a reservoir was built in this country was in 1992, 33 years ago. That's quite frightening. Yes, of course, we absolutely need more wetlands. In fact, I think 95% of them have been drained in the past 100 or plus years in Britain. And we need to use natural solutions like beavers, for example. I used to run an organisation called the Beaver Trust. There are many in North America and the Netherlands and so on, not many here. It's those sorts of natural solutions that will slow down water and store them for dry summers and also reduce floodwater as well. When we combine all of this together, less water and then more because of the heavy rains and extreme weather events we're seeing in different times of the year, with pollution and then the effect it has on the economy, we are in serious trouble here. And let's not forget extreme weather events like we saw at the beginning of the year, where if we extend the conversation to Spain, for example, Who would have thought that Valencia would have been flooded not just once, but again recently twice? And then just further south, you look at Almeria, where all the giant greenhouse systems are, which were smashed up by the storm. Are the Spanish, going to be asking themselves how they're going to feed Brits when they eventually rebuild those broken greenhouses? And I would extend that to the Netherlands too. Britain relies very heavily on food production from the Netherlands and importing fruit and vegetables, for example. I think we import about 65% of our fruit and veg into this country. And England, Britain generally are not isolated in this, Robyn. We have a catastrophe here where water security is affecting health, environment, nature, and of course things like food security too.
Well, you mentioned Spain, the Netherlands. I want to talk with you, Chris, about Greece, because that's got a different problem, really, hasn't it? In some islands, for example, they're having to ship in water from outside, from Athens, to deal with the increased population, particularly in the summer months with tourism. I mean, that kind of situation just isn't sustainable, is it?
No, it isn't. It isn't. And we're focusing in on drinking water, we're focusing in on tourism, but this is a huge issue. If you like, the latest numbers from the European Central Bank say that if an extreme drought, so that is defined as one that they expect to happen about once every 25 years, but these things happen a lot, could end up taking 15% of Eurozone GDP out in a given year. Now that is huge, and we're focusing in on farming, tourism, and our own personal consumptions, but it goes far beyond that. Like energy is also a strain. And it isn't just hydropower that will fall because of water. Cooling systems that's nuclear and fossil fuel plants are stressed by warming water. Reduced flows, reduced cooling efficiencies, meaning that they need to be shut down or their output is constrained. And then there's tech. Like, most people don't associate tech and IT and server farms with water, but they are hugely consumptive. Like, by 2027, it's estimated that global data centers will be consuming somewhere between 4.2 and 6.6 billion cubic meters of water annually. Now, just put that into context, Denmark uses 1.6 billion cubic liters of water a year, so that is absolutely huge. So whether like you're a farmer or a fintech CEO, it doesn't matter. As long as you eat, turn on the lights, or use the internet, water scarcity is our issue, and we need to take this really, really seriously.
So, Jasper, countries like Italy, Portugal already putting restrictions on water use. Is that something you think could work right across Europe?
Yeah, I think it's that's obviously really important. But I think that the overall problem we're dealing with is that we've created a climate system that has just become much more extreme. And we need to somehow be able to go back in time and get rid of these extremes. So we need to build infrastructure that can handle now that these extreme amounts of precipitations, these long periods of drought, and that we even out that system. So that requires a lot of infrastructure, a lot of education, that people are much more aware of what it is they're using and how that affects the natural system and what we have left. And so a circular economy, et cetera. So this is a huge challenge for humanity to deal with in Europe and all over the world. And hopefully by making smart decisions and doing good investments, we get out of it, or at least we avoid more and more damage.
Sasha, I wonder if there's a case for rethinking who water is used by. We talked about it being needed for agriculture, obviously personal use, but also for industry and economic growth. I mean, how can you factor all those in to work out who needs it most?
I don't think there's a simple answer as to who needs it most. We all need it, and yet water is so rarely prioritised in any kind of decision making, be that through government, through agriculture, businesses, industry. We just do not prioritise it. There's been a real disconnect from our freshwater systems, which means we're disconnected from where our water comes from. As Jasper said, there needs to be more education, there needs to be more prioritisation of water when we're making planning decisions, when we're making agricultural decisions. And so I really believe that we need to connect with our water, prioritise it, and that then we can have a better freshwater future.
James, do you think Sasha is right that water hasn't been prioritised enough and that there isn't perhaps the political will to get things done in this area?
Well, sadly, yes. As we started at the beginning of the show, we are in a freshwater emergency across Europe. And there are parts of Europe, particularly in the south, of course, but even a so-called wet and damp place like Britain, we are all going to struggle. In Britain, we have no such thing as a national plan even for water scarcity and trying to build in resilience to our water systems. And going back to who should have it, well, unfortunately, we're already seeing resource wars, including water wars, and happening across the world now. And I ask myself this: how long will it be before we start seeing violence, dare I say it, and social disruption in parts of Europe, whether it's the really hot places like Greece, Italy, and so on, or even in the west and the north of Europe in due course. And let's not forget the amount of displacement that's going to cause in due course. We don't know how long and from when, but in the coming years, not even necessarily decades, but in single-year figures, we could be seeing Europeans having to migrate north. And I ask myself, when we look at the way Europeans, and I should say this particularly aimed at my own nation in Britain, how we treat those coming from hotter places in the Saharan belt and Africa, when they're forced north as they are now, often by drought, by lack of water, and therefore lack of food, the social disruption that we're experiencing in Africa, for example. As those people are moving north, how welcoming are we to them? How welcoming are we to them in Britain? And I wonder, therefore, when it's our turn to have to, some of us, move north, which we will eventually, then I believe, anyway, many people may disagree at this stage and may call me being alarmist saying that, Robyn, but I believe it to be true. How are people going to welcome us? We need to help look after each other and not just have a plan for Britain, but a plan for Europe to solve this catastrophe.
So, Jasper, do you think there will be places that will simply be unlivable because of the lack of water, like these Greek islands, for example, where water has to be shipped in? Do you think there will be places that just won't ever have enough water?
I think so, yeah. If you look at the projections of the best models that we have, and you look at those climate projections and predictions, then there's going to be areas where it's just incredibly difficult to live for large populations, and they will rely on bringing in water, external supplies, and I don't know if that's sustainable on the long run.
So, Chris, James has called this a freshwater emergency. It sounds like you're all in agreement that something has to be done, but who's going to pay for this? How's it going to be paid for?
An honestly difficult question. It needs to happen, though. It needs to happen. We have one thing that we could be doing in Europe is using more of our wastewater. We currently only use about 2.4%. While places like Israel, who are obviously far drier than we currently are, use up to 80%. So there is technology out there to allow us to be extending the boundaries of what's of water scarcity and what we can deal with, but it is going to be enormously expensive. It isn't a choice though. Like it is an absolute necessity if we're going to kind of continue to have the lives as we know them within Europe. Budgets need to be found.
So, James, would you like to see some kind of pan-European solution to this, some kind of joined-up thinking between countries in the EU to tackle this issue?
Well, I would. And just before I come on to that, following Chris, I think when it comes to the cost issue that you raised, Robyn, let's look at it the other way around. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I meant to say the investment side. Let's look at the cost side. In London, when London, not if London, runs out of drinking water, Thames Water, the main provider to the city, is estimating it's going to cost £500 million a day to the British economy. Now, if we extrapolate that across Europe and imagine what it costs economies like Greece already when water shortages are happening, then the cost of inaction is far outweighing the cost of investment. So the way I would look at this, not as an economist, but as an ecologist, is that we need to reduce consumption, reduce those leaks, build reservoirs and so on as an investment. So it should be less about where the money comes from and more about how it saves us money in the longer term. And then when it comes to working together across Europe, well, if only, dare I bring up Brexit, but if only Britain was still as close as it was to its nearest neighbours, we're going to really need each other. I mean, as an island, we are extremely vulnerable for water and energy and food, the three most important parts of our economy and how to survive in the future. Not just survive, but thrive. And then if we look at other nations, like we've mentioned Greece already, those nations that are struggling already, and if we go further east, of course, even more so, then we are going to need to look after those nations very quickly. So just in the same way that aid is offered around the world and has been for development purposes for many, many decades, generations in some cases, we're going to need to be looking at this in the same way for water and for food and sharing our resources, not fighting over them.
And Sasha, we've talked a bit about some of the big picture stuff, but I want to come back to that idea of personal responsibility. What can each of us do personally to reduce that, what seems to me staggeringly large amount of water we each use per day? How can we cut that down? How can we save water that we are otherwise wasting?
Yeah, really simple actions like reducing the amount of times that we shower, flushing the toilet less, just being mindful of water usage. Don't clean your cars quite as often as you do. Really simple actions. Also thinking about what you put down the toilet. You know, wet wipes cause 80% of blockages in the sewage system. That is an issue then that affects the amount of water available. What you pour down your sink, oils and fats will ultimately enter the rivers. This then has a knock-on effect on the available water that we have. So just really being mindful about how we use water.
Sasha, thank you very much for joining us. James, Christopher, Jasper, a pleasure to have you on the programme. Thank you very much for coming on Roundtable. And that's it from this edition of Roundtable. But do remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.